Hi, I've clicked on to today's tropical tidbit for Friday morning, July 26th, and here we are in the Atlantic tracking tropical storm Dorian. And compared to a couple of days ago, the last time I made a video, Dorian looks a little bit less organized, actually more than a little bit. Last night it decoupled from its mid-level center here. Its low-level center was out to the west of the convection, and this morning there is a clear weakening of the circulation in the low levels, and it doesn't look as robust. And so compared to a couple of days ago, Dorian is a mess this morning. He is continuing to fire thunderstorms, but in general, the storm is still following the storyline that we expected. We expected that eventually here, this monsoonal flow has to get cut off. It had a nice moisture flow, but once you get west of 40 west or so, the southwest monsoon flow shuts off, the trade winds resume, and so now Dorian is completely isolated from the intertropical convergence zone and is on his own, and it will be up to him and him alone to maintain himself off of the ocean water beneath him. And we never expected him to intensify in the central Atlantic. Keep that in mind. This was never expected to be intensifying as it comes towards the islands, but near the islands still could intensify, or it could continue weakening, which is the problem we're having now with the forecast, is that the models have gone from a spread to now being very pessimistic about Dorian's future, and most of them now show him weakening into a depression or an open wave as he gets in this area. And I'll show that in a second. One of the problems for Dorian is also that pressures are rising around him. All these red colors here indicate 24-hour tendencies in pressure up by a couple of millibars, and Dorian is becoming isolated in an area of sinking and stabilizing air around him. And this is in part due to this very large ridge developing to the north here, which is having an effect on the tropics to the south as well. And this is going to make it hard for Dorian to take advantage of his situation. The good news for Dorian is that this is not a Chantal situation. When Chantal was trying to keep a closed circulation, she had strong trade wind flow everywhere around here. Right now, Dorian has a very strong trade wind flow just to his north, but the winds to his south, you see, are much slower in speed, and this means that there's still an area of natural vorticity in a cyclonic fashion in front of him, which means that he may be able to retain a closed circulation here. If he opens up today, and we'll have to see if an ASCAP pass can reveal to us whether the circulation is still closed. If he opens up and loses the convection, it could be good night to Dorian, and he may actually dissipate here. I'm still holding to the forecast for the moment that he will be able to remain a tropical storm. Remember, when he looked good over here, this indicated to us that he was more likely to survive to get to this area near the islands and still be something to track in here. And I'm still sticking to that forecast. And remember, he was never going to strengthen in here. The big question mark really comes over here. If he's still a tropical storm, will he strengthen or will he weaken in here? One of the problems with this is this upper trough that's sitting in the way here, and this would be a guaranteed to kill Dorian if he was moving into this trough as it stands right now, big dry trough just sitting here. But as it stands, we have a lot of convection going off in the middle of this upper trough, and this is releasing latent heat into the atmosphere above, and this is going to cause the upper trough to weaken over the next few days, and it will not be shearing the environment as strongly as it is currently. And if we look at the European forecast, here's the upper winds north of Puerto Rico, Hispaniola in the purple wind barbs here indicating the 200 millibar low. Dorian is this kink in the black isobars that might be kind of hard to see here. The European still really keeps this an open wave, has never tried to develop Dorian, and has initialized it incorrectly the last few days, but it may be doing a little bit better during the next couple days if Dorian actually does weaken here. But regardless, you can see the wave approaching this upper low, and then as we go out to day 4 here, the upper low starts backing to the west of Dorian, and the shear flow is out of the south, which is a little bit more divergent and not quite as unfavorable. And then the upper low continues backing west, and by the time we get out to day 5 here, the upper low is fairly weak, and we now have a ridge over where Dorian could be if he still survives. So it's not the most unfavorable situation in the world. The problem is that Dorian is very small, and small systems like this, they're good at fighting dry air, they're terrible at fighting wind shear. So if he encounters this trough in any kind of negative fashion, it could very well rip him apart, and that's what the models are now showing. This is the GFS out to day 3. Showing a weakening Dorian now with under tropical storm force winds. So this is a weak tropical depression on the GFS, and then it continues weakening it and dives it west-southwest into the mountains of Hispaniola and Cuba, which is interesting because the GFS shows the west-southwest motion in response to the mid-level wind flow, which would generally steer stronger storms. The weaker storms would tend to follow the low-level flow, which is more towards the west-northwest in here, and that's why you see the European here even showing Dorian moving well north of Hispaniola, even though it's an open wave on the model. So it's hard for me to trust the track on the GFS, and I still think this will try to be kind of an island scraper, regardless of whether it survives in here, likely scraping the northern Greater Antilles and trying to scrape the Bahamas as well in here, gaining some latitude to get around those mountains. But the big problem, of course, right now is the intensity. You can see quickly here the tracks of all the other models. North of Hispaniola, some of them dive down here in response to the GFS because some of these are fed input by the GFS, but a lot of them still north of Hispaniola here. And that's in general what my forecast follows, as well as the National Hurricane Center for now. The thing about the GFS, though, is showing this weakening Dorian by the time he gets to the Lesser Antilles. And a big question is, will he be this weak in here, or will he be maintaining or strengthening slightly as he nears the Lesser Antilles in Puerto Rico? If we look at the sea surface temperatures right now, Dorian is about here, and this is at about 26.5 degrees Celsius water, and he's now moving west over progressively warmer water, and if all else remains equal in his environment, then we're talking about 2 or 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius warmer water by the time he gets in this region. And so it's a little bit hard for me to believe that if Dorian retains a closed circulation, that's the caveat, if he retains a closed circulation, he should be able to be a little bit stronger in here than what the GFS shows. The GFS shows it dying basically completely in here. I think it should remain a tropical storm in this region, and you'll see that in my forecast reflected. The big problem is going to be beyond that, where Dorian could either become a hurricane if he survives and strengthens, like the GFS was showing a few days ago, or he could dissipate due to shear from that upper trough. And this is a harder forecast now because the environment doesn't look particularly unfavorable in the southwestern Atlantic, but the models are now all pessimistic. So this is becoming a more difficult forecast as we go along. Overall, my forecast here, the track has been the same as it basically has been for the last few days, and the intensity forecast before the islands here really hasn't changed. Fairly steady intensity from Dorian, perhaps some weakening due to the decoupling episode it had last night during the next day or so. I expect it will be able to remain a tropical storm in here, and then I show some very slight strengthening as it moves over warmer water in here. And then I note here that the confidence, at least in my mind, for the intensity forecast days 3 to 5 is lower than normal, and that's because of all the balancing negative and positive factors we're talking about here. And given Dorian's small size, always very hard to predict the intensity of tiny storms because they are very fragile, but they can also ramp up in a hurry due to warm water feedback. So this is going to be an interesting storm to track, but the good news is that right now it is not a threat to become a hurricane in the near term. It could be a long-term threat, but there is a large degree of uncertainty right now, and overall the islands could watch it for rain here, but it's not going to be a big storm. We've never expected it to be a big storm in here, and perhaps way down the road the southeastern US and Bahamas should still be monitoring to see if Dorian actually becomes a threat in this area. But again, uncertainty is rather high, especially today now that the models have become much more pessimistic, which is good news about Dorian's future, but it's still not set in stone, so we will just have to track him over the next few days and see how things work out. Alright, that's it for today. Thanks for watching.